Commissioner? Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Testing. Hello?
Now can you hear us?
I can hear you, Commissioner Lee.
There we go. Okay. Welcome. All right. As always, we start with a prayer, reading, or a thought, and the Pledge of Allegiance, and we look to the audience for participation. If you'd like to, if you got a prayer, reading, or a thought, and the pledge. Any volunteers for that? What would you like to do? The prayer? Okay, thank you. Anybody would like to lead us in the pledge? Okay. When you come up, if you just state your name, that way we know who you are.
Leah White. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful that we can be here together and that we live in this free country where we are able to have a voice and help make laws and uphold them and review them. And we're grateful, Father, that we especially live in Utah, where we have these beautiful mountains and this wonderful people that we get to live among. We're grateful, Father, that we can bring all of these items to this commission today, and we pray that that we may uphold the law and look at things objectively and with eyes that see. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for participating. We have a number of items on our published consent agenda and our regular agenda, and we will move all of the items published and all the published consent and regular agenda items onto to our consent agenda to be approved, ratified, or adopted. And then we will go and pull items off of both our published consent and regular agenda so that we can talk about them. And if they're not pulled off, then they'll just be consented to be agreed upon. If at any time we come to an agenda item during our discussion, if you'd like to speak to it, please just come up to the microphone, and at the appropriate time, I'll signal for you, and you just give us your name, and you can talk on that agenda item. And then our public comment, generally, just general public comment, will be at the end. So with that, we'll now build our agenda for discussion this morning. On our published consent agenda, item number 6 has been asked that we continue that for 1 week. And
7.
yeah, I haven't turned the page yet, but I'm getting to 7. 7 as well, continue for 1 week.
I have no problem with that.
Okay. Number 8, we did get the account numbers and everything all set on that one for the budget, right? Okay. If we could hold number 9 for discussion. It's been asked that we continue number 10 for 1 week, unless there's some objection. Okay. Number 18, it states on there that we do have Exhibit A, and there's not an Exhibit A.
Hello.
So on that one, well, let's just hold that one. Number 20, there was a question if we needed to continue it or not. Do we need to? Looking at Amelia. Are we continuing number 20?
Yes, we are on the phone with them in the hall right now.
So continue it for 1 week?
Yeah, just continue for 1 week.
Okay, continue number 20 for 1 week unless there's a objection. If we could hold number 1, number 2, number 3 and 4 for action, number 5, number 6 for action. On number 9, if we could just have a second review for little minor typos and so forth that are in there. If we could hold number 11 for discussion. Number 13. Number 14. Number 17. Any others?
15.
15.
Yep. I don't have any additional ones.
Okay. All right, so we just pulled all those off for consideration to be talked about. And all the rest will be left on consent to be ratified, approved, adopted, or as stated in the commission. Is there any comment on those that we are now adopting or ratifying? Okay. Seeing none, we will go back to number 9. This one's to approve and authorize Utah County Commission Chair to sign an agreement with Car Wash.
Yep, quick whack.
Quick Quack, that's right. Couple questions. I see that it's what are we doing currently?
We have just the wand type car washes. We have one at Public Works and one at the jail facility in Spanish Fork. That each time you go in for the car wash, it gets charged. Your vehicle gets charged for that wash. We've had a request from some of the departments to be able to have the ability to utilize something countywide with an automatic car wash. We were actually approached by Quick Quack to do one. Their standard cheapest rate for a monthly unlimited pass is $18, $17.99. They're offering it to us at $10 per vehicle.
And we have 119 vehicles.
Yeah, we have more vehicles than that, but like several of them in Public Works, because of the racks or the fuel tanks, things like that, you couldn't take them through an automatic, so we didn't include those in that. So this would include most of the vehicles in the sheriff's office, some in Public Works. I believe there's some in some of the other departments as well, the passenger vehicles that it would include. So.
And they all come down to your facility now to do a car wash?
Or the individual driver goes to Quick Quack or Wiggy Wash and pays for it out of their own pocket, which happens quite a bit.
Okay. So have we done an I mean, how much is it costing us on a yearly basis to do that versus this year?
For a typical car wash vehicle, wash the vehicle at our car wash at Public Works or at the sheriff's office, it charges you $4 each time you do it. If the vehicle's dirty, then they wind up doing it twice. Therefore, it's an $8 charge to the vehicle, and that basically covers the cost of the soap and the equipment there at the site.
I'm just trying to figure out. So what's our cost on a yearly basis for?
For this contract?
No.
Oh.
For how we're doing it now.
I couldn't tell you the aggregate cost. I don't know.
I'm just trying to separate between what it costs us now and
I
what
couldn't
it's
tell you off the top of
going
my
to
head what
cost
that
us.
aggregate cost is. We could figure that out, but I don't know it.
I mean, I don't have a problem with having the cars. I'm just trying to find out.
And,
You know.
and if you'd like, we'd be happy to go through and research out what that number is. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah, and then the cars. So, how did you pick these cars? Was it the 119 cars?
Basically, the cars that would be able to go through the automatic car wash, like I said, there's some of the ones, for example, some of the ones in Public Works or some of the ones in the Sheriff's Office that, because of the equipment that's on them, they just cannot go through an automated car wash.
So if they could go through, we just do it. I'm just
And it was in consultation with the Sheriff's Office since they're the biggest user of this, so.
okay.
And in reading through this, part of my understanding is the reason that this particular entity was selected is because it's going to cut down on drive time.
Correct.
Because they're
They
located
have-
throughout the county, so like,
There's like 10 locations in the county.
our vehicles in the north end of the county or out in Eagle Mountain and such would be able to have closer access to a wash
It
without
would
having to
be
drive
available at
across
any
Spanish.
of the quick quack car washes in the valley, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not arguing against washing cars. That's,
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean, we
and
need to
we
get
like
that
to-
done.
we like
I just
keeping
don't know
clean,
I don't know what we're
And we-
doing
and if
now,
you'd-
money-wise
If
versus
you'd like
what,
to continue the week, we'd be happy to research that and provide it to you, so.
or what we could do. Have we explored any other options? I mean, I go down and spend $2 and wash my car, with the handle
The-
on.
Yeah, as far as like going in for the regular car wash like that, that's typically what the charge would be similar to with what we do at our current car washes. It averages out to be about $4 to cover the cost of the materials. That's why we charge $4 for it to each of the vehicles as they do that. As far as looking at other vendors, I know that,
I don't know about vendors, maybe options.
and, you know,
There's
we,
lots
we,
of car washes all over the valley.
and we did look at like a Wiggy Wash, could not get a response out of them to even consider something like this. Quick Quack was willing to do it to all of their locations. They do have the best coverage in the county, so, as far as where their locations are.
Well, I don't know the other commissioners if they want to move on this. I would prefer maybe just a little bit more research on it so we can verify
Either way,
what we're doing, why we're doing it all the way through.
fine either way.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and move that we continue consent agenda item number 9 for 1 week.
Second?
Okay, I won't be here in 1 week. Is it, how time sensitive is it?
It's not time sensitive, so.
I mean, if we, okay, 3 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't
That's
wanna
fine.
hold it up forever.
Yeah,
if
we're
we need to
fine.
get it done.
There's not a time crunch on it, so.
Okay, I got a motion and a second to continue it for 3 weeks. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. We continued number 10. Okay, number 18. As I'm going down through it, it says that we're referring back to Exhibit A.
Which is the
boxes that are-
proposal.
and there's no boxes checked. So I don't know if none of the boxes are checked on it, so it looks like we're not agreeing to anything. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, am I on the wrong one? Oh, I'm sorry, this is 18, sorry. I jumped ahead. You're like, what? This one says Exhibit A, but there is no Exhibit A.
Right. Exhibit A is the proposal. All of these grants, we reference the actual proposal from the city
Okay,
as the exhibit, so.
yeah, I just didn't see
Yeah.
Exhibit
We'll
A.
make sure that's included, thank you.
Okay, I'm fine with it. I just didn't see that Exhibit A. I was jumping ahead. Okay, so Exhibit A, as it's stated in here, is the proposal itself, just as we note that. Motion be in order?
Move that we approve consent agenda item number 18.
Second?
Get a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item number 18. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 1 is to accept the annual payment in lieu of taxes and receive an update on land management activities in the county from the Division of Wildlife Resources. Come on up.
Morning, Commissioners. It's good to be here today. My name is Jason Vernon. I'm the Regional Supervisor for the Division of Wildlife Resources here in Springville. I have a couple of purposes for being here today. Number 1 is to present the county with its in lieu tax payment. As you're aware, there are properties throughout the county that are owned by the state, by the Division of Wildlife Resources, that the county's not able to recognize tax revenue on. And so today, under contract, we do have a check for you to make some of that up. The check is for $16,195.93. And it also has a letter from Director Fowlks talking about his appreciation for the commission and for the county and for the cooperation and collaboration that we have, and just a thank you for everything that we have going on together. So I'm not sure who I can hand this to or who you would like to take it.
Let's hand it here. They'll record it. Thank you.
With me today, I also have Riley Peck. He's our wildlife manager for the region as well. And I guess I would just open it up to you. Maybe I should mention one thing first. We're excited about the purchase the county made of the Knowles property on the south end of the lake. We're looking forward to providing angler access, sportsman's access, in cooperation with the county on that, and been working hard to get that put through for several years now, and recently met with Robert and trying to get that set. So anything we can do to get that moving forward, we're excited for a ramp there and some fencing and some other facilities as well. So that's something that is important to us to allow access to anglers and sportsmen out on the lake, especially where we're starting to get crowded here along the Wasatch Front, or more crowded. But if you have any questions beyond that I could answer, or Riley could answer, I'd be happy to entertain those.
Well, I know we're working on a couple projects, the Provo River Delta project, down there, and we went on a field trip with the Wakara Trail, proposal out there, and I know that you're involved in at least looking at those and,
Sure,
and
yes.
what can be done, and so those are, and we appreciate your input into those.
We're excited for those open space areas that we can continue to enjoy the wildlife, as well as hopefully enjoy some hunting and angling opportunities out there as well.
Yep. Where's the best fishing hole?
I can't tell you.
Don't you guys schedule and have it on your website where you're dropping, where you're?
We do. We have several community fisheries throughout the county that are stocked regularly, so those are all available. My favorite is Strawberry, so, and things will be picking up there pretty quickly up at Strawberry, so.
Sure.
But all that's available on the internet as well. But
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the work, and thanks for coming in and
all right,
presenting.
thank you. If you have any questions,
Always
please,
thank you for the check.
You bet.
Can't we just, can we bill it though at the Greenbelt rate instead of at the Pilt rate? I mean,
Yeah. Beyond my control. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your
Commissioner.
help and work.
Thank you.
I will move that we accept the annual payment in lieu of taxes as stated in regular agenda item number 1.
Second?
I got a motion and a second to accept the annual payment as stated in number 1 on our regular agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 2 is to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 9 of the Fire Protection ordinance here in Utah County. This is one that was continued for more discussion.
Good morning, Commission. Kirk Bertelson, Utah County Fire Marshal. So what we've done is added the definitions out of the fire code and the International Building Code for tents and membrane structures under our definitions section of our Chapter 9 in the county code. So we have definitions there to tell us what they are. And then And then we also, moved the exemption for temporary tents to 9-1-10, so we put it in the general part so that it covers the whole chapter, not just those wildland urban interface areas. So just to clean that up and clear it up a little bit better. And then the others didn't change, nothing else changed from last time. You have any
Okay.
questions for me?
And then just your title changed on that one, right?
What's that?
I mean, the title changed from fire to fire marshal.
Yeah, that one was from last time here. We're just changing that fire chief to fire marshal just because, when we lost the fire warden, Kevin Cortez, and we hired the new fire chief, it just felt like it would make it clearer and easier so that people wasn't calling him to get, approval for a grade, on their driveways or roadways, when that's dictated out of the fire code instead of out of wildland codes.
Right. So you have, this is the one for the tents, and it says,
Oh, I'm sorry.
whenever the term tent is used in the chapter of Utah County Code, it shall mean a structure, enclosure, or shelter with or without sidewalls or drops, constructed of fabric, pliable material, supported by any manner except by air, or the contents where the contents is protected.
Right.
That's your definition of the word tent
Yes, sir.
that's in there, and I think I don't see any, does that also would include, yurts as
Yes.
part of that?
Yes.
And then the second part, though, it says, whenever the term temporary tent is used in this chapter of the Utah County Code, it shall mean tents or tension-membered structures, I need to get my glasses, it's hard to see sometimes, that are not erected for a period of more than 180 days within a 12-month period on a single premise.
Yes.
So where did the 180 days come from?
That comes out of the International Fire Code. So that is an International Fire Code that allows a tent or defines a temporary tent as that.
And it also says within a 12-month period?
Yes, sir.
Word for word.
Yeah, that's word for word out of the Fire Code.
Okay. And this is, so what you're saying is we're trying to mirror exactly what the International Fire Code is on that. And
We've already adopted the fire code. Yes, you asked for a definition in this section, so that's what we've done. You asked for a definition, Robert Moore County Attorney's Office, you asked for a definition of temporary tent particularly. So that's what we've done. We've taken the definition that comes from the fire code, and we put it right in here, so there's no question about what it is. Again, this is just for a temporary tent. This isn't for anything that, or your temporary yurt. If we were talking about a permanent one, that's a different discussion.
right, so this is one that is on the ground.
Yes, this is one that is on the ground and is just set up for that short period. And what it really affects is that definition between temporary and permanent and all of the rules and regulations once you go to the permanent step. That's what this is trying to eliminate, is so it's just very clear for anybody that reads this that they can have their temporary tent, they can go camp, they can use it, no problems. All the rest of that stuff doesn't apply once you get into the building code and the fire code for the permanent structures.
Okay. And just for clarification from my point, and what does it mean by single premise? What is that?
I think what that says is that if you erect your tent on a parcel, if you owned a parcel and you erected it on a parcel, you could have it there for this time period and still consider it temporary.
So you're saying the premise is parcel. So if you have a parcel that's 50 acres, then it's anywhere on that 50 acres. But if you've got two parcels, back to back, then you could do 180 days on one and you could shift it over to the other one for 180 days. I'm just trying to understand.
I think absent a further clarification in the fire code, I think that would be correct. If you have a single parcel you would not be able to have longer than 180 days in that parcel to be classified as a temporary tent. If you had parcels adjacent to each other, you could technically move it off of that, unless, again, unless the fire code defines premises differently. I have not looked at that definition. All we did is pull the definition of temporary tent into this. Do you know if they define
I don't,
premises?
I don't.
Well, we could certainly look at that issue if you'd like us to. But I think what he's telling you is he would define it as one that it's on a single parcel. So if they had two parcels adjacent, they could move it to a second parcel.
Okay. And then, the second part, when we're looking at 9-1-10, your exemptions of the temporary tent.
Uh-huh.
This chapter shall not prohibit the use of temporary tents or membrane structures that are used solely for recreational camping. Where did this wording come from?
That wording came from us. What we're trying to look at, or what I was looking at when I wrote this, was using a yurt or a tent as a rental, changing its occupancy from basically, for me to go camp in it, to now I can rent it out to anybody, which in my opinion changes our hazard level of that property. Your camping gear. If you go camping, if I go camping, I know my camping gear and I know how to use it and how to use it properly, and I have a vested interest in it. If I'm renting out just to anybody, I don't know the gear and I don't have a vested interest in it. And so my feeling is, and when you stop and look at building codes and stuff like that, anytime you move into a rental, the building codes, anytime you move into a rental that's other than just a single family dwelling, the building codes change. Fire safety is much, fire suppression systems and things like that, all are elevated for the increased risk. And so that's the thought process behind this, is keeping this worded so that when somebody goes out and uses their tent, it's just for recreation. It's not so that I can make a business out of it. It's just for our recreation.
Let me add to that. The fire codes and the building codes treat differently just the bottom line, they treat it differently if it's not recreational camping. So if you rent it out, they treat it more like a hotel in the building codes and fire codes. And so you have to address it that way. So this is meant to show that you can clearly have recreational temporary tents, including yurts, for 6 months of the year on a piece of property. Yeah, and that's what we talked about, and that was the thought process here, was to make sure that happened. So there's no question about that, because currently that's not provided in our ordinance, and you could make an argument that you can't have tents on a property, which that was not the intent way back when. So that's why we did this. Again, fire codes and building codes have both been adopted by the county and have certain requirements. And if it's a permanent structure, or if it's structured such as that you are renting it out, it changes the way the fire codes and building codes look at that structure.
Yeah, I'm just, we're talking about tents. And for me, I mean, I go around, I go to these Airbnbs, and I'll tell you what, I walk in there and they're brand new to me. I have no idea what their equipment is. I have no idea where their circuit breaker boxes are. I don't know necessarily their escape patterns when it comes to fires and everything else. I just rent a place to stay. And so, and of course, I'm looking at it in a certain sense of, I don't know if they've got earthquake strapping, tied to their foundations. I don't know those things. It's a place to stay. On this one here, I would prefer that it says that this chapter shall not prohibit the use of temporary tents or membrane structures with a period.
Let me address that. I think the problem with that, Commissioner, is that you're going to create a conflict, because he still has to apply the building codes and fire codes to structures. And
A tent. This is a tent.
correct, but the fire codes and building codes do apply if you're going to rent it out. It applies differently. And so now you might be creating a conflict between what our ordinance says and what the fire codes and building codes say that he has to do. Related to a tent, that is rented out.
The, kind of the hard part in the codes is that the definition of a structure is anything built or constructed, period. And so a tent falls as a structure. It is a structure as, by definition, in our codes. And so once you go to that, once you say, okay, now it's a structure, and now I'm gonna rent it, every one of them has to have a sprinkler system for the rental. So when you say it's a tent, you're right, it's a tent. Now, do you want me to, now because I'm in charge of enforcing the fire codes, do I need to go out and make sure everybody has a sprinkler system in that temporary tent? That's what we're trying to eliminate. It's just,
So if there's no money exchanged and we're not actually renting it, then does that change the dynamic?
there's no money exchange.
Yeah, it's not
That would be
rented.
That would be
Well,
illegal.
so
It's just
the
used.
temporary tent is an exception under the fire codes, building codes. That's why we put it in here, because it's an exception, and it allows you to go up and recreate and put your yurt up and stay in it for, for a period of time. That's what temporary, it's an exception. And that's what we're trying to do, is to highlight that exception, which currently is not in there now. And we're trying to highlight that and improve the ordinance by doing so.
Yeah, I'm going back to my point, though. If I have a structure up there and it's a tent, and I have individuals who say, boy, you've got a tent in a beautiful spot, I'd sure like to stay in it. I say, hey, go ahead. Are we in violation?
Without looking at the building code and fire codes, I would not be able to answer that question.
And I would think it comes back to that, solely used for recreational purposes. Are we gonna enforce that, even if, I don't see that would apply if it's your tent and your friends say, hey, I'd like to go stay in it. To me, that doesn't apply to where this is going. I think where this is going is trying to eliminate or try to at least regulate the rentals, the actual rentals. So,
Which again, the fire code and building code treats differently.
right.
And that's the reason why, if you don't put this in this way, then you're gonna create that potential conflict between, he's required to enforce the building codes and fire codes, but you got an ordinance saying that maybe not, and that creates a conflict.
Okay? Looks like somebody wants to, go ahead.
I just, for clarification, when you say conflict, you mean it exposes for liability purposes?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
right?
our
but-
ordinance saying one thing, and he's looking at fire code and building codes, which is where he spends his time in, because that's what he has to do. And, yeah, it creates a-
So the scenario that plays out is if our ordinance is in conflict with the standardized fire code, and we are in conflict and someone goes and rents the tent, it doesn't meet the code standards because we were more lax than the code standards, then the county, aka the people of the citizens of this county's tax dollars, become liable in the event of injury.
If it burns down, and someone gets hurt or injured or dies, yeah, I mean, there are risk factors.
The exposure then becomes to the citizens of the county because our code was more lax than the state or international fire codes.
I don't believe it.
That's the risk. That's what you're
Definitely
saying
is.
the risk is.
That
And
means,
again,
that means you better be up there looking at every single tent and making sure and monitoring it then, because there's no enforcement in this.
You're right.
when they come in and ask for a permit, that's when he definitely goes up and enforces it, yeah. But we don't know, I mean, obviously, they don't know about every single structure that's built in the county. When we find out, we work through them. We ask them to get permits, we go through that process of doing so. But very rarely are we gonna go up in the middle of the mountains and just look for a tent or a yurt, because it just doesn't happen. We don't have the manpower to do that. Nor would I think we're that interested in doing it.
No, and we're not. I'm just making sure we're clear on the fact that if we modify your verbiage here, we're becoming more lax than the international and the state fire codes, which hypothetically in an event could put us in increased risk because we've become more lax than state code allows.
And if you're gonna put it in there, then you better enforce it, because if you don't enforce it, then you have the risk the other way.
Sure, and I think we are attempting to enforce, we have right now, we've been enforcing on current yurt applications that have come in. But those have all been asked for permanent ones, and so we're dealing with those a little bit differently. They're treated differently under the fire codes as well, the building codes, than a temporary one. A temporary one, as we said, is a specified exception. And that's why we've used that exact language, so it's clear that that qualifies for the exception in the codes. So really, I mean, I think we're getting a little bit afield, but this is meant to be, to help with the citizens, to allow them to be able to.
Well, sure,
recreate.
because before that, tents were illegal in the county.
Right.
Arguably so.
And so, I mean, we could have all kinds of claims, you know.
We didn't discover that till recently. Any other questions for us?
Mark Allen, Protect and Preserve American Fort Canyon. Good morning, Commissioners. This discussion, I think, is nonsensical. State of Utah allows yurts. Why is Utah County trying to be more restrictive and, come
I mean,
on.
the state of Utah rents out yurts, tents?
State of
rents out
Utah
tents?
has yurts at Dead Horse State Park. They've grown to about 20 of them. They're very well engineered. They have a heating source. They do not have fire suppression other than an extinguisher. They're a glorified tent.
So they're going against the International Building Code?
Evidently so, and against what Utah County is willing to do. I think there ought to be an exception for yurts and glamping. Down in Moab, with my business that I work for, there's a glamping entity down there. What they do is they pull their tents down one day of the year so they don't have to pay taxes. That's nonsensical as well. The building planner down in San Juan County, Moab, Spanish Valley, allows yurts for residents. They do not require fire suppression. They figure they're just a tent. If they have electricity, they put an extension cord in. So how is it that Utah County throws roadblocks up where the state allows citizens to use their property and to use yurts? The state of Utah rents them out. That argument's a moot point. State of Utah and their best practices should override all of this stuff. Utah County should not be more restrictive than the state of Utah. So that would be my suggestion, that we create a new category instead of trying to shoehorn into existing code, that we create a new category. Glamping and yurts are good for our community. They have shown to be good for the state of Utah. The Uinta National Forest Service allows them up in the Bear River Range. They've got a series of 8 yurts where they do hut-to-hut skiing. And before Utah County right now, we have an opportunity to work with Snowbird Ski Resort. My group was oppositional to Snowbird Ski Resort 3 years ago, and we stopped a land swap. They now have permission to do a ski resort expansion, which will be very detrimental to high mountainous country. They are willing to look at a yurt hut-to-hut system if we can remove the roadblocks. So we have a chance and an opportunity to save a canyon and to make the citizens of Utah happy and to make a win for Snowbird, but not if we throw up roadblocks. So I'd ask the commissioners to create a path forward. Otherwise, Sundance Ski Resort has been in violation of your code. Go and offend them and tell them to take their yurts down. Aspen Grove Family Camp, the LDS Church, has been in violation of the yurt code. They have had yurts up as permanent structures now for a decade. Where's your fire marshal been in this discussion? So either enforce the law or change it. It's been illegal to camp in a tent. You changed it. Just change this. Thank you.
Commissioner, I think we better address that. So those yurts that are in Sundance are legal. They have been permitted. They've come through our process to do that. they have fire suppression, they have all the things that are necessary for those. LDS Church ones, there's one up in Hebrew Valley Girls Camp, same thing. They have a fire hydrant sitting in front of it. The ones on the state and federal property, they're exempt from our requirements and exempt from most requirements. And in those cases, I know Mr. Burleson has spoken with some of the other fire marshals in other counties, including with the state. And there is some, I would say, unfortunately, ignoring of the law.
Can the state exempt themselves out from the International Building Code?
No.
How do they get past that?
You know, we don't regulate the state.
They ignored it.
Yeah. That's bottom line.
So I've talked to Cache County, Wasatch County, Logan County, Teton County, and the State Fire Marshal's Office, all about this, just concerning this and yurts. Every single one of them gave me the same answer in the sense that, oh, you know, we just looked at it as a yurt. I didn't even apply codes. I didn't even look at the codes for that. That's okay. They can do that. But I don't feel like that's what you've hired me for. Steve Kitchen, our building official, feels the same way. The codes are in place and they're written and they're tried and tested. They're not just at a whim to say, you know, let's do this and this in the International Fire Code and building codes. And they're what is regulating this. It's not us just wanting to be, you know, bullies to people who have yurts or anything else. It's just us applying the code. And with the whole conversation of the permanent yurts that brought up this change that we're talking about now, it's not that we're not allowing them. It's just that there are requirements that they have to meet to do it. That's it.
Does the International
And
Building...
this goes back to, if the two of you own a piece of property next to each other up in our mountainous areas, and Commissioner Ivy wants to put a yurt on his and you build a cabin on yours, is it right for me to hold you to different standards than him? Yet it's gonna be a permanent fixture, it's gonna be a place where your families are gonna go recreate and do whatever it is they do. Is that, you see what I'm saying? I mean, does that make it right if you have to build 1 hour fire resistive construction, sprinkler systems, everything that we require right now that the wildland urban interface requires, but because he's just a yurt, he doesn't have to. And so if the fire starts over at his yurt and burns down his yurt and then starts the forest fire and burns down your cabin, did we do what we were supposed to do? Did we apply the codes where we're supposed to?
Well, I'm just saying that if you're gonna use that argument, then you better enforce it all the way through instead of just picking and choosing on what you're gonna enforce. Does the you know, solely used for recreational purposes, does that show up in the International Building Code?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
So more than likely, it sounds like we're enforcing it differently than what it says in the International Building Code. Because we're referencing the International Building Code on the one side, and then we're saying it differently. All I'm asking is that we put a period after structures.
Well, if that's your call, but if you do that, as I said earlier, that what potential problem with that is that if someone is renting it out, the fire codes and building codes treat that differently, and they may not qualify for a temporary tent under the building codes and fire codes. Even though you said they do under our ordinance, they may not. And therefore, if someone gets hurt or dies or whatever as a rental for those units, the county may have some liability there. I don't want to say we do. I'm saying that's a potential. That's a concern. And that's all, we're all raising it as a concern. But ultimately, you guys make the call. This is your ordinance. You decide what you want to do. But it puts this gentleman in a difficult position of having to regulate under the fire code and building codes, yet we've exempted those things, or attempted to exempt those things under our county code. And again, other jurisdictions are just ignoring it. There is a potential fix, the state statute for next year. They're looking at that right now, which may, in fact, exempt these out. But until that happens, we don't have the ability to just do it.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
can I make a comment? I think that this agenda item, as introduced with the red lines and the proposed ordinance, was only contemplated, at least in its redlined language as a cleanup of temporary structure kind of regulation and allowing for tents. I'm willing to have a conversation about, more significant changes, but I do not feel prepared. I don't feel like the ordinance as previewed for us to take action on today was contemplated in that with that significant of a change. So I would be prepared to take action on the red lines that we saw. If we're going to try to make a different change, it would be my opinion that we need more time, and I need to see the actual proposals and have opportunities to speak with our council and other affected parties if we're going to do a different change than was kind of previewed.
Well, the only thing that I'm personally looking at is the red line, and the proposed red line version, in which they have it in three places. Besides just the change of the name, you only have 2 places in there that we're looking at. And so the first one was the one in which they're talking about that was the International Building Code, and the second one is this exemptions of temporary tents, which is just the red line. I'm not looking at holistically the whole thing. I think there is further discussion that needs to go on, even at a state level, on this.
Agree.
Because and I think that's where I asked Bryce's group and others, as we're preparing for that, let's see if we can get to a point where, and this is across the state. This is not just an issue with Utah County.
Right.
This is across the state. The state's doing it. The state's ignoring the International Building Code, according to your words on it. Other entities are ignoring it too. This is going to come up as a state issue. It has to. There's got to be some resolution to it. And if you want to leave in the International Building Code, which we're following in our ordinance, I think that's fine. I mean, I'm not objecting to that. But this exemption of temporary tents is strictly our language. It is not. We're not tying it anywhere. We're not copying it from any other spot. And that's what I'm asking for, is that we just put a period after the structures, and then the conversation will continue. My fear is that we leave things in, and then they get left in, then they just kind of move on, and we never have conversations anymore. It needs to be one where we have this conversation, and I can guarantee you putting a period right there is going to make this conversation move.
Thank you.
Looks like, Mark, did you have a comment?
Yes, if I could. The yurt industry thrives across the United States as residential fixtures, as rentals. What are we doing here? I believe there ought to be an exemption for yurts or tents, period. And that we should embrace the economic opportunity to save a canyon, period. And anything short of that is short of that. We have an opportunity to come together with Snowbird Ski Resort, Sundance Ski Resort, and to do something that is truly significant. If the state of Utah can allow yurts as rentals, who are we to make it more restrictive? If the state of Colorado, the Uinta National Forest Service, are okay with yurts as temporary or permanent structures for people to rent and sleep in, who are we to make it more restrictive? So I'd encourage all county commissioners, the fire marshal, the planning department, to get on board with this opportunity to lead out. Why do we need to be followers? Can we not lead out? Can we not do something good for the citizens here? Something good for Snowbird? You realize that the opposition of my group against Snowbird 3 years ago was significant. It was ugly. I met with Snowbird's CEO for 90 minutes this last week. It was a great exchange. They are hopeful to use their property in a positive way. Yurts leave very little footprint. If we do not remove these roadblocks, they will go up there with dynamite and blast that high mountainous country and put in their ski resort. I told Dave Fields that I will support a 4-year extension with the Board of Appeals to allow them to see if this is financially viable. So I would encourage the commissioners to give us a 4-year exemption. Let's just put that in place right now. 4-year exemption while we're waiting for the state to see what's going on. Yurts can be put up, they can be brought down. Let's do a beta test. Let's give Snowbird a chance to win here. Let's give Protect and Preserve and the citizens of Utah a chance to win here. I'd encourage you to stay in a yurt. They are amazing. The fire marshal, his concerns I understand. But if he wants fire suppression in a yurt, he needs fire suppression in every single tent that goes up the canyon. They're no different. The planner and the fire marshal down in Moab area just said, we just expect them to blow away. But they don't. They're well engineered. So I'd ask for an exemption for 4 years maybe, or until the state of Utah figures it out. Because if the state of Utah can violate international code, they don't require sprinkler systems in them. Most of the time these yurts are put in places where there is not water. It's a pack it in, pack it out. It's like a hunting tent, a hunting camp. So if you need to change the designation or the name, the definition of a tent or a yurt, call it an auxiliary structure. I don't know what you need to do to make this fly, but that's my request. Let's make this a win for the citizens of Utah. And let's don't wait for someone else to lead out. We have an opportunity before us now to help Snowbird win and to help the citizens win. And I would ask the county commissioners, with all due respect, to just make that work. Thank you.
Okay,
I'm just looking something up really quickly.
Commissioner Range, any other thoughts?
I think my position kind of is the same at the moment, which is that, I haven't been briefed on, people are speaking there. I hear Mr. Allen speaking and is talking about Snowbird and deals and opportunities, which I have not been briefed on because it was not part of this ordinance. All I saw was this ordinance and the context that we had in our public meeting last time about this ordinance and tents. It sounds like there's a much bigger dialogue, and plain and simple, I have not been briefed on the bigger dialogue. Was not prepared to cast a vote, and I'm not going to without any notice or opportunity to look through the bigger issues.
That's fair enough. I mean, this has been an issue for me that has been going on for some time, and so rightfully so. There's, I might have a little deeper context in this on this issue, and so I appreciate that perspective.
Well, I'm looking through the verbiage here, and I'm just trying to, when I read 9.1.10, structures used solely for recreational camping. Recreational is relating to or denoting an activity done for enjoyment when one is not working. And so I don't see how we're becoming restrictive here. I don't see where it ties directly to whether I want to have somebody pay me a fee for staying in my yurt or my tent. I don't see that contemplated there in that language. I see it as defined as we're exempting out temporary tents.
That's interesting.
I don't see it as contemplating all of these other subjects we're dealing with. I see it as saying, as a county, the intent, I'm happy to vote for this as it reads, because my intent in supporting this is saying you can establish a temporary tent, which is defined above, and that is to be used for recreational camping. That's what it contemplates. Recreational camping, as I mentioned, is relating to or denoting an activity done for enjoyment when one is not working. The camping portion would obviously mean that you've gone away from your home dwelling into a wilderness type of setting. And so I'm trying to understand, I think we're arguing about a bunch of stuff that's not really related here. I think we're exempting out temporary tents.
So would it be enforced that way?
That's my intent. As the legislative body passing it, my intent in voting for this is to say that we are allowing for these temporary tents to exist and for people to use them,
Rented or not?
rented or not. We're not, nowhere in here, unless I'm missing something in the non-red line version, do I see anything denoted about ownership.
And what, you know, Rob can speak better legally about what you're talking about, but I agree with you.
No,
And I will
no,
enforce it however you guys tell me to.
right, nowhere in here are we talking about ownership of these structures or
Right, we're just trying to clean up the code and
renting
allow
of these
this
structures.
because,
We're just cleaning up the language to allow them.
right,
And so
This-
this other stuff isn't
this,
being contemplated.
right, the other part of this, the bigger part that Commissioner Ainge talks about is what did bring this up, because as I'm reading through it and we're trying to wrap our heads around how do we regulate this, how do we do anything with it, because the building and fire codes just flat out, if it's a permanent structure, this is what you have to have.
And for the minutes and for our minutes and for the directive as the legislative body in voting for this verbiage, the intent and purpose is to allow the use of these structures.
Exactly.
That,
That's the
and
goal.
I'm
That
done
is
with
the goal.
it.
Doesn't-
It's
It
not-
doesn't matter
it's not
if it's
to limit-
rented or
I'm-
not.
It's
That's the whole point.
It's not contemplated here. Nowhere in this fire prevention and protections section that I'm aware of, does it contemplate anywhere the ownership of the structure itself or who's staying in it.
I think is one of the point you ought to be aware of, and maybe it was a misstatement by our part. In 3103.2, this is the fire code, 2015. It actually mentions exceptions, and the exception says tents used exclusively for recreational camping. So the recreational camping is in the fire code. I think that's, so I think that's another reason why you need to keep it.
Right,
But it's an
and
exception, right?
it's an exception, and so
Otherwise, you have to have permit,
right.
that's what it says.
Exactly, and so we're not requiring you to come in to our community, I always want to call it,
The fire code
building
does
department.
reference recreational camping.
right, and so that's where this verbiage to me remains consistent, because we're not requiring you to come in and get a building permit when you want to stick your tent up. We're exempting you out. We're saying you can stick these things up, and all this other stuff we're spending hours arguing about isn't even contemplated here. And so in the passing of this language, I'm simply giving people the authority and the permission to go out and to camp. And if you want to charge your neighbor for camping, that's between you and your neighbor. I don't care. I'm just simply saying that's a permittable use on your land.
So the second question, and that's great, I think that sounds fantastic, but if I own some property up the canyon and I don't have a home or a residence down in the valley, and I decide I want to take my tent up there and live there for the summer, am I calling that recreational, or am I going to have to prove that I have a residence down in the valley to call that recreational?
We don't look at that.
And
So
by,
if you're in a tent, we're just going to call it
Yeah, be
recreational,
aware,
no matter
though,
what.
Our land use ordinance has a 45-day limit for camping.
But we have 180 days.
That's for how long the tent can
But
be there.
the tent can be there.
Right.
And so are we gonna take tickets in and out of how long you're there?
Oh, that-
again, it's an enforcement thing, and
Yeah,
and I don't have the manpower to enforce it. If you wanna hire me like 15 guys and we'll just go out and, no, I'm just kidding. Well, there's just, as you're stating, there's no way I'm gonna go out, we're not gonna be able to enforce what you're asking.
I'm not asking
We have,
for that.
we have, you know, like I
that's
say,
clear.
the yurt issue that came up was not just the Sundance one, but one that is actually erected. It's built as a permanent structure, and it's there, and that's what kind of started us on this. You know, we need to just make that exception so that you can use your yurt, you can use your tent.
So
in our
we're
codes.
assuming that anytime somebody's camping, or anytime somebody's in a tent or a yurt, that they are recreating.
I would say, yeah.
Well, and again, it goes back to the exception I mentioned here. This is exception to requiring a building permit or fire code. exception.
Right.
That says if it's tents used for recreational camping, then it's an exception to having that. And then you have the temporary tent, which is the 180 days, so.
I'm fine, Commissioner, as long as we recognize that they're recreating.
They're
They're 'cause
recreating.
When I read this, it looked like it was just saying, yep, yeah, we're clamping down on this thing. But if we're defining it as anybody camping in a tent or a yurt is recreating, I'm fine with that.
They're
They're not
recreating,
clamping
and
down.
they're recreating, that's why they're exempted out, that's why they
They're-
don't have to come in and
Trying
get
to
a
make this
building
easy,
permit.
not hard.
Yeah.
And we're making it so they don't have to go through all that process. They can just go recreate. And again, ownership, rental, all that is not contemplated, not dealt with here. So because it's not contemplated or dealt with here, it then is left to the individual to have the freedom to do with it as they wish.
And the difference is if you try to make it permanent, then you do have to.
And I would agree with that. If you're going to make it permanent, then we're going to have to step up our safety standards. I'm not objected to that. That's
Who
why
wants
we're
to permanently live in a tent?
defining it as temporary and, well, the Mongolians, I guess, I don't know. They like to travel around. It's fun. And so there's some days it sounds appealing. So to me, I think we're defining it as recreational. It's a temporary structure. We're cleaning this up to make it easy for people to go do what they're supposed to go do. Have fun in the mountains. And if you want to make it like an Airbnb, go for it. I stay in them all the time too. And I know the permanent structure Airbnbs meet building code standards because they went through a process and to receive that approval. And if I'm going to go rent a tent, I'm going to go under the assumption that I hope the guy knew how to stake it right and put the poles up, and I'll maybe double check it when I get there to make sure it was done right. And that's between the two of us.
Some fall down.
But some fall down. And so there's an inherent risk there. But so for me on this, I'm great with it. I think it frees it up for us. And as legislative intent, I can make it very clear for the record that ownership, rental, none of that is contemplated here. This is simply exempting out those structures.
So Dave, a question for you really quick on that. Would we need to just in the motion clarify that on the legislative intent for that? Or should there be something written that also is clarified on what that legislative intent is?
Well, the language would control unless there's some ambiguity, and then the legislative intent could be looked at to try to resolve any ambiguity. But typically, the language itself is what will control.
Right, and for me, the language here controls, and if there becomes ambiguity, we have on record the legislative intent.
So that could be a part of the minutes.
Part of the minutes?
Yeah.
We'll just make sure that's part of the minutes.
And that's why I've stated it like 5 times. I'm sure she's getting it.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Bryce Armstrong, Community Development. I think Kirk's intention here is to somewhat align with kind of what we've already contemplated and addressed in our land use ordinance. If you recall, last year, we specifically identified camping as a use in a number of zones, both for property owners and their permitted guests. We included that in our language.
Perfect.
And then the camping obviously has the 45-day limitation to prevent someone from living there. Every summer, we get 1 or 2 complaints that someone's living on the land from a citizen, and so we enforce it at that point. But I think this intent is to allow someone to maybe have a yurt even, to set it up for 6 months and then come and go, on the weekends or whatever, the 45-day window, so they don't have to take it down within that 6-month period. I think we're trying to accomplish that as a temporary use.
And it doesn't matter if they're asking them for money or not for rent.
Says
We're
that-
silent on that.
It says they're guests. We're silent on it.
Permitted guests.
So it's a
Permitted
permitted
guest.
guest.
Permitted could be, go
Right.
ahead and use it, or pay me $5.
Give me $5, yeah.
Fair enough.
The permission is not contemplated, therefore it's free, between the two individuals.
Any other thoughts? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up here. A motion to be in order.
I'll move that we adopt the ordinance as stated in regular agenda item number 2 with clarification as needed to be referred to for legislative intent from the minutes.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance as stated with the legislative intent noted. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Okay, number 3 and number 4 are for action, for veteran abatements. Any questions on either one of those two?
I didn't have any. I felt they were both appropriate and should be approved, so.
Okay, we can do motion on, we'll have to do them individually, but we can do one right after the other.
So I will move that we approve the late 2018 disabled veteran abatement application for Mark Howard with the finding that the failure of the claimant to timely file the applicant was beyond the claimant's reasonable control and to not extend the deadline would be against equity or good conscience.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the late veterans abatement. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 4.
Move that we approve the late 2018 disabled veteran abatement application for Wayne Andrus with the finding that the failure for the claimant to timely file the application was beyond the claimant's reasonable control and to not extend the deadline would be against equity or good conscience.
Second.
I got a motion and a second to approve the late veteran abatement. Stated number 4. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 5 is to receive the recommendation proposal on the RFP. This was for a public information manager officer. We went through this process. We had a number on our committee. We had a number of applicants that came in, and we went through a process of having them come in and visit with us. All 3 commissioners were on it, as well as other members. Robert.
Yeah, that's, yeah, there were originally 7 proposals, and the committee chose to get presentations from 6 of those. And the committee voted on those proposals and came up with 3 finalists, 3 proposals, and they were Watkins Global Strategies, the DCO Group, and Tactical Campaigns. And so now it's up to the commissioners to select one of those 3 proposals for the further negotiations and award of contract.
Okay. The recommending committee did come with, in that order that you mentioned, on recommendations. And then looking through the scorecards on it, obviously I can see that there's differences, of opinion. And I felt very strong about the DCO group and gave them high recommendations, the highest that you can get on a scorecard for fitting what I thought was the needed, necessary, timely, and also being able to jump into to doing it right now, not waiting periods of time or doing any benchmarking. And so with that, there's some differences of opinions, and so that's why we're here, work through it.
So as I contemplated the required criteria, Watkins Global actually was my number 1. Actually, I believe my ranking was exactly as listed here. The primary deciding factor between the 3 entities listed was the cost for me, because the Watkins Global kept us in our current budgeted standard, but I felt all 3 groups definitely met the requirements as far as their abilities to perform the tasks that we need.
I would agree with that. I am grateful for everyone who sat on the committee and all of the groups that came in and presented. I view these final 3 groups as being very capable to perform this function. I've had professional contacts with all of these groups, and I have worked with Watkins before, and I find that when you look at this 3 and you think they would all do a good job, there was a significant cost savings with the Watkins group. So I also rank in this order.
Okay.
I'd be happy to make a motion if there's no further discussion, or do you want to? Obviously, this is to begin negotiations before, so.
Right. The and I'm going to point this out just for reference purposes. We did have a contract before in which we put out there was the dollar figure that we were willing to pay. And I realized that the other groups, some of the other groups came in higher. I think there was 3 or 4 others that came in higher. I personally thought that value that we got out of a past contract, the reason why we left the past contract was because it didn't suffice for the needs that we had in the county, and part of my concern was that if we stay at that level, I'm concerned about that level being the same with the output that we get. That concerns me because I don't necessarily want that kind of output again. I was concerned also, and I ranked Watkins high. It's not like I didn't rank them high. They were high. I thought their presentation was well done, but now I'm looking at a head-to-head on that. We have an individual that didn't demonstrate any backing of more than himself, and he was out of Davis County, which is fine being out of Davis County because I actually come from Davis County, but nevertheless, there is some distance there, and I'm concerned about where how that's gonna work, frankly.
When I looked at their performance capacities, I felt they were very strong, and given our budgeting restraints, especially, over the last few years, I felt that all these firms will do the job very equitably as far as their capacities, and so the cost savings was the deciding factor for me. Given their professional reputations, their capacities, being familiar with all of them, having worked with them, I wouldn't have anything negative to say about any of them. So it truly came down to the cost savings for me because I believe they're all going to perform the function at a significantly increased level over what we had and very comparably between the 3.
Okay? Well, a motion would be in order.
I'll move that we've received the recommended proposals for the 2019-6 Public Information Manager and recommend a proposal for further negotiations with the Watkins Global Strategies.
Second?
I've got a motion and a second to accept Watkins Global Strategies as to receive that proposal and to accept them as the Public Information Manager with further negotiations, which I'm sure we're gonna have to work down through because there was a lot of talk in there as to what that meant on multiple different levels. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Nay. That's a 2-to-1 with Commissioner Ainge and Commissioner Ivy on the affirmative and Commissioner Lee on the negative. Okay, so that passes 2-to-1. Number 6. This one is to deny or approve a late amendment to the 2018 Disability Veterans Abatement. As I looked down through this one, it looked to me as if the only reason why it's different than the others above is a timing issue.
Yes, this is Vicki Westergaard, Clerk Auditor's Office. I called Alex Yusevich at the Tax Commission about this application. The way code is written, to amend an application, which this is, the change in the percentage has to occur the previous year. And he is requesting a change for 2018, but his percentage changed in 2018. So what Alex said is that if you want to change this where he gets a refund, you would have to go the green folder route because he wouldn't be eligible for the abatement the way we normally do it to be changed.
I'm not sure I quite followed all that, but
I'm glad I wasn't the only one that's kind of like,
Paul Jones.
I thought I understood it, but maybe I'm a little confused.
Paul Jones
as soon as you hit the
Attorney's
green
Office.
folder, I started jumping to other green deals that were going on, and I was wondering.
This is Paul Jones from the Attorney's Office, and I can probably muddy the waters more than anybody else.
Thank
so.
you.
So this
You are the
gentleman's
lawyer.
already receiving an abatement.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
When you get a letter of disability from the U.S. Department of Veterans, you get a percentage of disability, and that affects how much of an abatement you get. He's already, he was at a certain percentage of disability,
oh,
and his
And not-
rating just changed.
And it went up to
Oh.
100.
So
Right.
he's already getting an abatement. He wants to increase the level of abatement, but his rating just changed to 2018.
Right.
And you have to have that in the previous year. So he would be available for the increased abatement in 2019.
19.
Not 2000.
So in denying that, he's just asking for the increase, which he's not eligible for until this next year.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's
Okay.
what I thought we were doing.
I just didn't want to be denying a veteran. That
Right.
was
Right.
the part
Yeah,
that was
but-
really,
Like
He
I,
is getting an abatement.
like I
okay,
tried
so he
to
is getting that.
explain, as the legislative body, we can go the green folder route if you want to
Right,
change it. But-
right.
But the abatement way, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
And he knows all this, right? I mean,
I
he's-
told him that, yes.
Okay.
But I told him we'd have to go before the commissioners.
motion be in order.
I'll move that we deny the late amended disabled veteran abatement for, I'm gonna slaughter this name, Kuda Telefoa, with finding that the failure of the claimant to timely file the application was beyond the claimant's reasonable control, and to not extend the deadline would be against equity or good
Those
conscience.
findings may be a little confusing, because I think the findings carried over as
Yeah,
if you were going to approve it.
you would
can
actually
strike the
need to make a
findings.
finding that it was not
Not
timely.
timely?
Yes.
Okay,
that it-
I'll rephrase that then. I'll move that we deny the late abatement as stated in regular agenda item number 6 because the applicant was not timely.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to deny the abatement with the findings stated. All in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye?
Aye.
That passes 3-0. Okay, we didn't hold 9, right? That one we just had some clarification, correct?
Right.
Okay, now we're getting to the number 11.
So just to be clear, on number 9, was there clarification that needed to be made?
There was
or-
just another review to make sure. It looked like there were some minor typos in there that we
Okay.
probably should just
So
kind
if you
of clean up.
approve it,
We
can make-
approved it.
Oh, okay,
We
We approved
approved
it
it,
with
got it.
just looking to make sure the minor
just
typos.
fix the typos.
Okay, will do, thank you.
Okay, number 11 is to approve a governmental entity amendment between Utah County and the Nebo School District. And this is the one where when I hit the agreement, it states that we're accepting everything that is checked on the boxes. But when I look up above at the boxes, none of them are checked.
Yes,
I apologize for that. Heather Lewis, Prevention, Substance Use Prevention. It should be the first 4 boxes.
Just the
Should have
first
it
4
checked.
boxes? Can you read them off so that we just have it in the record which the first 4 are? Because there's like,
I have that right here. I
8 or
could
9
read that
of
if
them.
you'd like. The prevention dimensions curriculum teacher training, the prevention dimensions classroom hours taught, the student assistance program dash selective and indicated populations, and the parenting classes, comma, first offender course.
Actually, all of those boxes should be checked. So
Right.
all of those should be covered in the contract.
and that was the first 4. He just read out the first 4.
So that, in
Just
that
those
box,
4?
All of those, everything should
Yeah.
be covered
The-
in that. There shouldn't be anything
Including universal
excluded.
services, college age, prevention, senior prevention.
The college age and senior shouldn't be, sorry about that. Yeah, the
So just
college
the
age and
first 5?
senior Should be, yeah, the first 5, sorry.
first 5, okay. Okay, so we can approve this
With that correction.
with that correction?
Yes.
And-
Okay.
And I can go to that in
It'll be made.
any additional.
No.
Okay. All right, I'll move that we approve the government entity addendum between Utah County and Nebo School District for the purpose of providing substance abuse prevention services in the following areas: prevention dimension curriculum teacher training, prevention dimensions classroom hours taught, student assistance program selective and indicated populations, parenting classes, first offender courses, and universal services.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second to adopt sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. Approve the agenda item number 11 with the noted changes. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 13 is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County Land Use Ordinance, Chapter 1 and 4, relative to requirements for lots, lying in multiple zones. And Brandon, Bryce, come on up and let's talk about lots lying in multiple zones. It's CE1, CE2 stuff.
Very exciting topic. So occasionally we have property owners who do have lots, parcels lying in multiple zones, and it's been a little bit of a challenge trying to help these property owners. Sometimes been frustrating when you have a property owner has just maybe has a 5-acre parcel in the RA5 zone, and a little bit is in the I1 zone. That keeps them from being able to have a one-family dwelling on that property. This is brought forward by Richard White. The idea, staff drafted it. The idea, the application itself came with no language, so staff drafted the proposal. Staff and the applicant both saw a need for something like this in the ordinance. Right now, the Chapter 1.3 says, in a nutshell, that where you've got two conflicting regulations, the most restrictive one applies. And so, again, back to that RA5 I1 zone example, because you've got this little tiny piece of I1 on an RA5, mostly RA5 parcel, you have to enforce the I1 zone requirements as it relates to putting in a home on the property. The I1 zone just doesn't allow for homes, and so it's kind of a challenge. The applicant himself has a little bit of a challenge. He's proposing a mountain home development, and it's about 67 acres of land. And there's a tenth of an acre that is in a different zone from the rest of the land. So the 67.9 acres is in the CU2 zone that allows for mountain home developments, and then this other tenth of an acre, 12/100ths of an acre, is in the CE1 zone that doesn't allow for mountain home development. So staff drafted a proposal trying to basically allow a property owner to use the majority, to use the zoning regulations from the majority zone. And then we put some conditions in there to try to protect against some issues that we saw. Tried to limit this to, we feel like there are a number of cases where it's probably better for the property owner to just come and rezone his property, but where you've got a small amount of land, maybe the idea was to come up with a way for the property owner to use the majority zone requirements. So we looked at about 60 parcels and looked to see how much of the land's in the majority zone, how much is in the minority zone. So the average we found was about, I think it was 18%, and the median was about 14. So what we did was we proposed, okay, so if roughly 20% of these properties have a minority zone percentage of 20%, we'll propose that as long as you have no more than 20% of your land in the minority zone, you could take advantage of the majority zone requirements. The other thing that came into play in this is we have to make this line up with the general plan, and the general plan really discourages mixing commercial and industrial uses with uses like agricultural and residential uses. So we inserted some language in here to basically restrict subsection D outright restricts I1 zone uses in the minority zone portion of the lot. Commercial uses are also restricted in a great way as well. We went to the lengths of trying to restrict structures. You can't. So if you're allowed to build a home in the majority zone, but the minority zone doesn't allow for a home, you can't build a home in that minority zone portion of the lot. We're trying. The idea there is to try to keep structures out out of structures that weren't intended to be in that minority zone, keep them out. The other idea was, well, we've got to consider the watershed. So we've put restrictions in there on the ability to locate septic tanks in the CE1 zone, because the CE1 zone is connected to the watershed areas of Utah County.
Can I just ask you
Yeah,
really quick?
yeah.
As we're going along?
Mhm.
So if the minority zone does allow for a structure, let's say that it bumps into a CE1 and they do have 50 acres, even though that's the minority part, they can put a structure on there.
Correct, yeah. Yep,
But if it changes to a CE2, you're not saying that you can't now put at least just one home on it.
Right. So in an event where you've got a parcel that's part in CE1, part in CE2, as long as, if you had a 70-acre parcel and 20 was in the CE2 zone and 50 was in the CE1 zone, you could build a house on either side of that, in either portion of the lot. And that's kind of how we drafted it. It's like, okay, yeah, you can build a house in either portion as long as you meet the area and width requirements of the applicable zone. We also made it clear that if you're above 20%, you can't take advantage of the provisions of this text amendment, and also we made it clear that you can't conduct minority zone uses in the majority zone. So we feel like this is a really helpful tool. We think that the current ordinance is a little too restrictive right now, and that this tool loosens up the restriction a bit, and it still protects the watershed, and it still and it also helps to keep commercial and industrial uses out of agricultural and residentially zoned parcels. And staff would recommend that you adopt the ordinance. And if you have any additional questions, I'd love to answer them. So.
Brandon, I have a question.
Sure.
Have we encountered this? I mean, is this really a one type of situation that is driving this, or is this something that we're encountering on a somewhat frequent basis?
It's definitely something that we've come across. It's not Mr. White's property alone. Again, I identified just 60 just in the limited research that I did. Put a lot of research into it, but I don't have an infinite amount of time to do it. But yeah, we found 60 parcels that have split zoning, and we feel like this is not a proposal that just benefits Mr. White. It benefits a great number of properties. If you look at the spreadsheet that I prepared for this item, you can see that I identified parcels in most major areas of the county.
This is Bryce Armstrong, staff. I just want to kind of add on to what Brandon said. He's done a lot of great work and research on this. A lot of times we'll come across this quite often. A property owner has a property that was zoned by the legislative body decades ago. Since then, them and an adjoining owner have adjusted their property line, which was the old boundary line, just to match use or historic boundaries. And so now all of a sudden they've got a very small amount of another zoning inside their property line that's prohibiting them from taking advantage of what they understood their property to be. And so we're really trying to accommodate what they understood their use was, and to be consistent there, and to allow for these. I mean, if you zoom in enough on a parcel, you're going to find that almost at some point. And so just trying to be practical in the application of it.
And can you explain to me why they're prohibited from using it? Because, like, what is the difference that we're talking about? As he was going through the exceptions, it sounded like, at least in some cases where a home is not allowed, even after applying this language, a home would not be allowed in that portion of the parcel. And so I'm curious how that's different than just being able to build. And clearly it's my lack of understanding of kind of how this works, but can you maybe explain what's different about those two scenarios?
Sure, this is Bryce again, and I'll let Brandon add to this too. In the scenario I just described, for example, we have some parcels that on West Mountain, the majority of them are below the Highline Canal, so then the RA5 zone. maybe their historic deed creeps up above the canal, or, you know, maybe the canal's moved or whatever. I'm not saying it has it there, that situation, but, so for example, they have an 8-acre parcel, 6 of which is in the RA5 zone, the back acre or 2 are above the canal, they're in the mining and grazing zone. Currently, the ordinance says that if you have restrictive or conflicting regulations, so in this case, we have 2 zoning designations. One requires 5 acres for a home, the other requires 50 acres for a home. In that scenario, the current ordinance would require the most restrictive, meaning since they only have 8 acres, they can't have a home on their property at all. And so what we're trying to accomplish is, hey, you've got 6 acres in the RA5 portion, even your back section is 2, and so as long as you're building in that RA5 portion, you have the ability to have your house there, and despite the back portion being the mining and grazing. Does that kind of clarify it a little bit in the scenario?
It does, thank you.
Again, we just want to hit home the point that we're really trying to keep, you know, structures and uses that weren't really intended to be in that minority zone, keep them out. Again, this prohibits structures. In Mr. White's case, if you know, if he had additional CE1 land, you know, say he had 10 acres on the west side of his development, he couldn't put houses, he couldn't build houses in that CE1 portion of the development. And so no additional septic tanks, no houses. We're just trying to keep that out, but we're trying to allow someone, like Bryce just said, someone who has sufficient acreage to conduct a use in the majority zone, but he's being restricted because there's a little bit of land that's in another zone that's keeping him from being able to enjoy the use of this property. So.
And one thing I found interesting in this particular scenario was it was a CE1 type of conflict that come up, but in your identified parcels, it's generally RA5 versus mining and grazing.
Yeah, I think
that's the larger. It was always kind of interesting because these things tend to come to us because of a reason or a conflict that's come up. But when we dove down through this and looked at unintended or, outside of this particular instance, it was interesting to me that most of those were RA5 mining and grazing or grazing conflicts,
yeah,
where the identified parcels were.
For sure. West Mountain would probably be where you get a lot of those.
Greatest populace of those.
So if I can walk through a couple questions, just I have on it too. We have parcels with different zoning, and we'll just do the RA5 and the mining and grazing because that one's an easy one to look at. And then we're doing the most restrictive, which we're not changing any of that zoning though on the mining and grazing, right?
No, the requirements aren't changing at all.
So we're just saying that they don't apply. The mining and grazing zoning doesn't apply to the RA5 remaining parcels that are in ownership.
Right, we're just saying, okay, despite the fact, with Bryce's scenario, despite the fact that you've got those 2 back acres in the M&G1 zone, you can still use that 5 or 6 acres in the RA5 zone, still get the building permit for the house, despite the fact that you've got some of your land that has some different requirements on it.
But it doesn't change the land use or the zoning on you still have mining and grazing.
Right, it's not going to change the zoning at all.
Okay.
No,
I was a little worried that maybe we were saying since you own that property, that the whole thing becomes RA5.
No, this is not this doesn't rezone the property. And that brings home another point. Part of the reason why we like this is because the guy that has the 5 acres in the M&G1 zone and the 2 or the 5 in the RA5 and the 2 in the M&G1, if he comes in, it's going to be a couple-month process to get his property rezoned, all the noticing, pays $600. This is kind of a fast track for somebody in one of these situations to get his land use application approved.
Okay.
This is Bryce again. One more quick comment on that scenario. A lot of times in this situation, the RA5 zone, the mining and grazing zone, they do share some uses, agricultural type structures, and so they're obviously in those situations, they're still free to locate it in either side of the boundary. It's only that area that specifically is limited by zoning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Okay. Any other questions for Brandon?
Sorry, I actually do have one more question. Now that I hear this work through, I understand that what we're trying to do here, and as a property owner, how this remedies the situation. But as you just mentioned, all it is a fast track. I mean, if this had 4-0 support at the Planning Commission, and if it has support at the County Commission level, it would assume that people who are in this situation are going to be able to get a rezone. And perhaps, and I guess I would ask for a comment back on this, is it cleaner for our records and for our general plan to have those either rezones or subdivisions of those parcels done going through the full process? And perhaps anyone who's in this situation can take comfort in the certainty that they're going to get approval, even if it takes a little bit longer to clean it up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is cleaner on your records to have a property show that it's all in one zone, but in practicality, there's so many split zones through the count, so many parcels that have split zoning. I think this is a great tool to address a need where, you know, you have rezones, you've rezoned, you've had multiple rezones through the history of the county, and it's that there's just a lot of these parcels out there, and we feel like this is a great way to kind of help some of those people out, especially those who just have a little bit of a different zone on their property, rather than have to go through that 2-month process to get their property rezoned.
This is Bryce again. I think that would probably be maybe one, if you could find a drawback, just the fact that it does kind of not as clean as you'd wish. And so to address that, that's why we kind of came up with a certain percentage. You know, we've looked around the country to see how other people handle this, other jurisdictions, and some just have a simple majority, you know, 51%, and felt that maybe that was getting to the point where you probably needed to do a rezone to kind of clarify that, and maybe to address that, to bump that percentage up a little bit too. You know, that's always an option too. But I think it is a very useful tool in situations where it's been the result of a boundary adjustment or other type of similar unintended action. So.
Any other questions for Brandon? Okay, looks like we've got some comments, public comments.
Mark Allen, Protect and Preserve, American Fork Canyon. Thank you for passage of the prior motion. I appreciate that. This dovetails into this prior discussion. If I may approach the commissioners, I've got some documents for you.
You don't mind these being public?
No.
Okay.
When we start talking CE1 zones and plats and uses and watershed protection, my ears perk up. As you're aware, I'll just read this so it's in the record. Dear Utah County Commissioners, as you're aware, our nonprofit American Fork Canyon Alliance has a parcel of land on Miller Hill in American Fork Canyon. I have been before the commission 3 times seeking to pay taxes on this parcel of land. Yet the processes with the state of Utah, central tax assessing, and their statutes made it challenging to navigate. Historically, active mines at times would span county boundaries, and with the complexities, central tax assessing was necessitated. Now, given the new land uses, recreational, skiing, and mining, having not taken place in American Fork Canyon for 60+ years, it's appropriate to have lands locally assessed. Senator Valentine has adjusted some statutes to allow the local county to identify lands within their boundaries and ascertain if they're used for mining or other purposes. As for this purpose, if the purposes are for other than mining, the county can initiate local tax assessment. This is my request. With local tax assessment, the privately held parcels of land can and should be added to the Utah County plat maps. I have a list here of approximately 700 parcels of land up in American Fork Canyon that do not show up on your county plat maps.
I can ask one question, Mark.
Yes.
So this is applicable to this discussion with the split and different zoning?
I believe that because you've got some land down by Tibble Fork that I'm not sure if that's in CE1 or CE2. I think it kind of is reflective of a discussion that needs to take place as part of this split thing. CE1 zones, I know they've got some septic tanks up in CE1 zones. So when I hear CE1 zones and septic tanks restrictions and so forth, I know that there's already some septic up there. So I just don't want to see.
I'm just trying not to confuse the issue with what we're looking at on our agenda. With something that's-
Understand.
Yeah.
So this may be a little bit muddy in the water. That's not my intent. It's just to make sure that we don't pass a ruling that may have unintended consequences up in the CE1 zone. And so, given that patented mine claims sometimes span county boundaries, CE1 zone, split uses, and so forth, that's why I thought it was relevant to bring up. But right now, the county has the opportunity to get from the BLM the data set. It will be available on Wednesday, the cadastral data set for American Fork Canyon that will allow you to look and see if there are split zones or property ownership that's spanning two different zones. So just wanted to make you aware of that so that we don't pass something that may cause some conflict up in F Canyon. So not trying to muddy the water, but that's just the knowing that we've got 700 pieces of property up there. They're not platted, not mapped. Don't want to cause problems for 700 people or 700 parcels in trying to fix something for 60.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you see that the same way, Brandon?
Again, I'm a little familiar with some of the projects Mr. Allen was referring to. All of American Fork Canyon is CE1, especially once you get above Tibble Fork, but even down canyon. So in that situation, this would only apply to those existing zoning designations that are currently have mixed zoning on their parcels. And so, and other issues that we've tried to identify that may be related to watershed, those have been addressed and tried to address them through the proposal.
Any other public comment? Come on up if you'd like to.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dion Barron. I live at 3 Meadow Drive in Springville, 84663. I'm actually been asked by someone who couldn't attend today because of his work in the medical field and asked me if I would come and read his statement. And so I'll just begin. It's from Brent Bowles, and he lives at 1501 Meadow Road, Hubble Creek Haven, Springville, Utah, 84663. So this letter is from Brent. To County Commissioners, I attended a planning and zoning meeting in April. In the meeting, it was proposed by Mr. Larson to change a zoning requirement on C1 and C2. The proposal was to rewrite the requirement that if less than 20% of the land that was inside a C1 and a C2 area, that the C2 would not be required to follow the C1 regulations. The way that this was explained by Mr. Larson was very confusing. In the April meeting and the poor explanation, it was difficult to digest exactly what this meant. Even the planning and zoning panel was not completely clear and had questions about it, but they also didn't even know what questions to ask because it was so foggy. After reconsidering and having time to think this through, it is opening Pandora's box if this is allowed to pass. As a developer, I could find properties that border one another or have the same situation that is being discussed in the backcountry estate proposal and develop the property that has less regulations. The idea was that the county would not allow industrial type development, meaning junkyard. That's the example that was used in the planning meeting, with less than 20% rule. I think the new C2, C1 regulation and bill is less restrictive requirement. This is a Pandora box. 20% is no small amount of land. 20% out of 50 acres, that's a huge amount of land. What was clearly evident, Mr. Larson and the county attorney, Mr. Moore, at this meeting were bending over backwards to push this development through, even down to requiring less water requirements for this planned development compared to previous water requirements in other planned developments in Hobble Creek Canyon. I am concerned that the developers have a very close relationship with those in the county's planning and zoning office above what is normal. When I applied for my building permit and septic permits, I was never given the attention these developers have been given. After many discussions on my permit, I was basically told, do what you want to build. Do you want to build or not? These are the rules and standards, no exceptions. Now it seems there are exceptions if this amendment is passed. Unintended consequences to the public to this long-standing ordinance is a burden too great to bear, and I believe it is not in our best interest. Let's keep our laws, rules, and regulations consistent to all. Respectfully, Brent Bowles, Utah County. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Okay.
Carol Ferguson, 82 North Meadow Drive, Springville, Utah. Excuse me, I have a lot of allergy problems. In the example that has been used with Backcountry Estates, it is 87 acres, and they're talking about 1/10 of an acre being a tiny sliver, and yet they're trying to use 20%. 20% of the 87 acres would be 17 acres, and that's pretty substantial. It appears when you are talking about different zoning requirements, as you're talking about the industrial or whatever the other zoning was, it's really different than zoning in a critical environment. And I liked some of the verbiage that was used today by Kirk Bertelson. He used the verbiage, change hazard level. I know the job that you have is very difficult and has a lot of challenges. You're gonna make somebody happy and somebody not happy. It's a win-lose situation. I do appreciate all the time that county staff spends on proposals and trying to come up with the best remedy. And it appears to me like this might not be the best thing in a critical environment in the CE1 and CE2 areas, that it's really important to make sure unintended consequences have been used several times today. And I think that it's very important to make sure there are not unintended consequences in a critical environment area like up in our canyons. In critical environment areas, it seems like it would be important to use to meet the most restrictive application in order to avoid those unintended consequences. You have been elected by citizens of this county because they trust you. They trust you to be forward-looking, and it is my hope that you will continue to be forward-looking as you examine exception requests and as you examine proposals such as this to see if there are unintended consequences in critical areas. Thank you for your service and for your time. I'm not a wizard, Bess. Give me just a minute, please.
Make sure and give us your name.
My name is Janice Reeb. I live at 146 Hobble Creek Canyon Road in Springville, Utah. I am representing myself today and also Tom Maurer. I don't know what your time limits are. I know his letter is more important than what I would have to say.
Hopefully about
so-
3 minutes or so.
Okay. This letter is, my name is Tom Maurer. I live at 79 North Hobble Creek Road in Hobble Creek Canyon. I'm writing this letter because I'm unable to attend the meeting for April 30th. My letter is in protest and opposition to the development that is working its way through the Utah County system to develop CE1 and CE2 zones within the canyon. My family and I own over 2,000 acres in the canyon. Since the late 1990s, we have lived there for the past 13 years. Since that time, we've experienced 2 large fire threats, flooding, road closures because of snow, downed trees, and flooding due to only one way in and out of the canyon on a very narrow and winding road. The same property owner developer that developed cottages on approximately 32 one-acre lots protested our 3 homes because of the water shortages that are currently under review by the state of Utah. The state has now appointed a special water master to adjudicate all water in the canyon because of water shortages and over-allocations. The Whittemore cabins directly above the proposed subdivision have now lost one of the 3 water sources due to a spring drying up and having allocated $2,500 to appoint a geologist to locate a new water source. Water is a scarce resource in the canyon. The proposal by developers to lower the water requirement to maintain green space should not be allowed. That is number 1, and I'll move on to his number 2 point that is more germane. It came as a surprise to me at the recent Planning and Zoning meeting that a proposal was made to allow up to 20% of a property with a different zone designation to be included in a development with the same zoning requirements as the remaining 80%. In reviewing the zoning boundaries and property ownership's records after the meeting, it is apparent as to why this proposal was made. The long-term goal of the developer is to develop and cluster as many homes as possible in this critical environment. Through the proposed zoning changes, access to county roads could be gained and CE1 zones could be moved into CE2 to build many more homes. As you know, in the CE2 zone, subdivisions are a conditional permitted use, and you cannot build a home in a CE1 zone in less than 50 acres. This will be the next move through the Utah County system if it is allowed. In all, 100 to 150 new homes could be added in the next few years with the changes that are asked for. This year, the cabins above the proposed development will chlorinate their drinking water. In years past, the Scout Camp has closed their well for E. coli. Additional septic load will not improve water quality for the 150-plus residents of the left fork of Hobble Creek or those in Springville relying on drinking water for Hobble Creek. In summary, changing zoning, lowering water requirements to accommodate 6 new homes will be opening Pandora's box only for the long-term goal of developing this critical environment. It will be the start of doubling the population of the left fork of Hobble Creek, doubling the traffic on a dead-end road, negatively impacting watershed and increasing fire danger. There is a reason why Springwood was not developed since it was first platted in the 1970s, and that particular subdivision is a major part of what he was speaking about, which is essentially an legally undisclosed phase development. I will just shorten what I would have wanted to say. Listening from what others have said, the issue seems to be an issue of scale. The example that was given by Brandon Larson is for, a 1/10 of an acre for 68 acres, I think. There is another proposal that would indeed have a relevance in that Next door to the developer of whom Mr. Maurer was speaking is the home of Richard White's parents. It's simply a coincidence, but that particular property is an 87-acre property. 20% of it, just over 20% of it, is in the CE1 zone. The rest of the property is in the CE2 zone. If this particular amendment goes through, then it's quite possible that all of the property would be treated as a CE2 parcel, which would open the door for the development of more homes. The crucial part is the CE1 piece, and I had this printed out and left it on the kitchen counter. The CE1 is the frontage that is needed on Hobble Creek Canyon Road that makes development of the entire parcel possible. It's a matter of scale. Tom mentioned that he had 2,000 acres. After the meeting where this particular amendment was produced or was brought forward by Brandon, Tom, told me in the hall afterward, that's a terrible idea. And I said, why? He said, well, use me as an example. I have many acres worth of land. Much of it is adjacent to my home. If I really wanted to, on that scale, I could develop hundreds of homes around on my own property because I have the frontage and because I have enough property to make the scale of 20% of my property as a CE1 and 80% of it at CE2. It would give me the option to do a huge amount of development. It's a matter of scale. I heard a lot today about, is it RR5 and industrial one, and the grazing that you were talking about. And that is a special case and a special problem. In Utah County, we have a beautiful canyon, Hobble Creek Canyon, there we go. And it is the water source not only for the residents who are in the canyon itself, and there are about 150 of them. It's the water source also for hundreds of people in Springville, because at the end of our dead-end canyon is where the watershed comes down into the creek, down through the system, also provides the irrigation all the way to Utah Lake. It was specifically zoned CE1 and CE2 in order to prevent the destruction of the watershed and the canyon resources that it represents. I think that the issue might be resolved to some regard if there could be a cutout regarding CE1 or CE2 zones. It does appear to me that this is a single zone specific problem, and the examples that have been given are for small properties, and 1/10 of an acre is certainly not what would be 20% of 2,000 acres. So I think that at very least, this amendment needs to be re-examined. I also want to end with this. I have great respect for the community development department in Utah County. I was the planning and zoning commissioner for about 5 years. I know how hard they work. I'm extremely impressed every time that Brandon Larson puts forward some work. He works long hours, and he is meticulous about what he does. And the interaction of that whole department with the general public, when I was sitting on your side instead of this side, and this side is much more difficult, by the way. It makes your mouth go dry and your knees knock together. And I also want to tell you how appropriate it was and appreciated it was that during the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, Tom Little, as the chairman, was given the option, because it was an administrative meeting and not a legislative meeting, that he did not have to listen to us at all. But they did listen. They did listen respectfully. And I think we're well served by citizen communities. Again, thanks for your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple, if that were, with, if, no, this would be for staff if public comment is done.
Yes.
You know, in reviewing this, just to maybe help us understand a little bit more historically, how do we get into this scenario, right? Because it seems a little odd to think that we have a parcel of ground that's a chunk of ground, and somehow when it's zoned, that ground is split, right? So first off, maybe if you could talk to us a little bit how this scenario's created in the first place, and why a parcel gets split as far as the zoning in the first place.
Yeah, so I think we brought up one previously, boundary line agreement. So the zoning that we're looking at kind of dates back to 1976. And since that time, there's been a lot of property line changes, and I think that's part of the reason, part of what you're seeing. Sometimes, especially up in Hobble Creek, the surveying is really off up in the left-hand fork of Hobble Creek, and what you see may not necessarily. If you got a surveyor on site, it may not be exactly what reflects on county records. Again, yeah, boundary line agreements would probably be the biggest thing that I can think of. I don't know if you have any other.
A lot of times, it's Bryce Armstrong in with staff. A lot of times, property owners will adjust their property lines on their own, whether it's a boundary agreement or just deeding off a property or cleaning up or combining properties. And so we see, we sampled 60. We have hundreds of these, if not thousands, if we look close enough. And so it happens all the time. A lot of times these boundary designations followed known lines, a river, a geographic feature, a section line. That's kind of a known feature. And then individual property owners adjust their own boundaries through different instruments that record at the recorder's office, and then would result in these situations all the time. So.
Okay. Are we, one sec. So are we doing something to potentially address that so we're not creating more of these? Do we have some type of mechanism in place to say, so when we combine parcels, when we do a boundary line adjustment, or do we need to craft some type of language so that if somebody comes in and they're creating a parcel that is going to be in a split zone, rather than having it fall in the split zone for future reference, it's just automatically, that zoning is automatically changed with the property line. Does that make sense? So we would avoid this problem in the future.
Yeah, that can be difficult. The recorder's office, and maybe that's a question for them. They're obligated to record an instrument if it meets certain requirements, vested ownership, and they have a legal description. I don't think that, by state law, they can run it through the zoning, making sure it's conforming with zoning. We find that problem all the time when people divide their property without going through a subdivision, and unfortunately, it would be great if they could have a check before they did that. To make sure they're complying, but we're not set up that way, and so we have to handle it after the fact.
Okay, and that was my question: is if there's something we can do to help avoid it in the front. The next question I've got is from a historical perspective, when we've run into these problems where people have come in and they've applied for a zoning change. So I've got half my property's in CE1, half of it's in ZE2. I want it to all be in CE2 or CE1, it wouldn't matter. Historically speaking, have we generally awarded that reclassification?
That's really kind of dependent on what they're asking to go to and if it complies with the general plan. In that scenario, that parcel's bisected by general plan designation, and so they'd have to be consistent, but we'd have to take a look at that. I would imagine especially if it was a majority situation, they'd probably be favorable in general, that approach, but that discounts maybe some of the land use policies and the specificity of the site.
Okay. And in relation to this ordinance, for perfect clarification, what we're allowing here, we are not allowing any additional density or development on the restricted part of the parcel,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
So what we're saying is very specifically, you can simply use your land based on the classification under which it falls under.
Correct.
So if you've got 5 acres that fall under a specific zoning, that 5 acres can be used according to that zoning. The additional acreage that you might have on that parcel cannot be used for increased densities or anything like that. That is staying, and I just want to, that's my understanding, I want to make it perfectly clear that more restrictive part stays just as restrictive as it always has.
Correct. And I think there's a little bit of misconception, some of the comments I heard, that just we're not changing zoning designations, nothing's changing in the scenario that was given. The 20% of their 80, 60, whatever acre parcel is not going to become CE2. It's still all going to be, or CE1. It's all going to stay the same zoning designation subject to those requirements. But we're just saying that you can only utilize that portion that's in that entire zone under those provisions of that zoning designation.
Okay.
A question for you. Why 20%? Where'd that number come from?
Again, it was just the average of the, we took the 60 parcels, and the average number, the average minority zone portion of those 60 parcels was 20%. So we're like, well, we'll try to benefit, we'll see what that average is and try to benefit the average of the parcels we sampled.
Those are random samples.
And so we could do a little bit more in-depth, looking throughout the county, because there might be more than 60, right? There could be
I'm sure there's
1,000 out there.
Could
So
be,
that's
yeah.
an average of just those that you pulled off.
Yeah, we're trying to be efficient and
Yeah.
time restrictions, but sure, yeah.
Right.
And obviously that's, 20% on a larger parcel is going to be more, a larger portion and as far as acreage.
Right.
And so, we get that. There's going to be a scale there. And again, that was kind of what we felt in looking at what the need was there. But if it's something that maybe needs to be tightened up, then I think that would still serve the purpose that we're trying to
What would it mean to
accomplish here.
tighten it up? Would you make it more?
Like
Or-
10% maybe, or, make that minority portion a smaller percentage,
portion,
if that makes sense. At some point, again, we looked at other jurisdictions, some simply had a simple majority, you had 51%. And we felt, in that situation, you probably need to go through the rezone process to.
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And so, but maybe say 90, 95%, we run into these scenarios all the time. We had an application that
I
wanted.
guess, and kind of, Bill, maybe this is part of the, for me, the struggle with this is if I'm looking at a landowner and I've got 90% of my property is RA5, and you're telling me I can't build on it because 5% requires me to have 50 acres and I have 25 acres. To me, that's kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, and that's when we look through all these various scenarios and trying to look at it from a property rights scenario, that's where it gets frustrating. Now, if I'm at a 51%, yeah, I think you could maybe make the pitch, but I think there's a strong pushback that's saying, no, you're not quite there. But if I'm looking at a high threshold number like that, or a vast majority of if I've got 25 acres, and 20 of that acres is RA5, and I want to build my house and my barn there, and you're saying I can't because I've got 5 acres that sits in mining and grazing, so I need to have 50 acres to build. That seems very, very restrictive from a property rights standard. And so that's where I see this, where I like what this is trying to do in trying to err towards the awarding of property rights. But I do recognize that there could be, when we get into large volumes of land, that does somewhat change the makeup. And so I'm trying to work through in my head, is there a percentage? We've set a minimum of 1 acre. Does it make sense to set a maximum as well? Where we're saying, look, if you're dealing with, and I'm just throwing numbers around, if you're dealing with a 50-acre parcel, you're dealing with a 100-acre parcel, maybe then you probably should look at a rezone, because we're affecting such a volume of land rather than holding the percentage all the way through on the large end, what if we say when you reach a threshold of acreage because of the impact of that, does it make sense at that juncture to set a maximum as well?
So where would that be, though?
I don't know. what-
We're looking at, 50 acres in the CE1 for building of homes. That's kind of a natural fit for 50 acres.
That's a natural fit for 50. And I think that's our most restrictive zone, right, is 50 acres. And so are we gonna say if you're at 50 acres or 75? I'm not, again,
I
I'm not
don't know
sure.
where that is
I
either.
don't know what that number would be, but part of what I'm saying is, would it make sense if we're setting a minimum number of 1 acres, holding a percentage through, would it then make sense to go ahead and set a maximum acreage as well, recognizing that that total acreage does play an effect on the overall downstream user in those scenarios?
That's an idea that we've had. One idea that maybe we'd throw out is maybe bump the minority percentage down to 10% with a 5%, with a 5 acre maximum that could benefit, utilize this provision, this amendment.
Yeah, we maybe want to extrapolate some data and see.
I know,
Yeah,
conceptually, I like what we're trying to do.
I do too, because
I'm-
I don't like this minimum controlling.
Right, and so I conceptually like what we're trying to do, but I am a little bit worried about where does this lead in a long-term scenario, and especially on a large scale. So to me, it makes sense if we're saying there's minimums, well, then we probably should try and extrapolate some data to look at the scenarios and say, it makes sense to have a maximum number to where we're kicking it into a scenario that you simply go through the rezoning process. And I think that's something to keep in mind in this whole discussion, is that even if we set a maximum, it's not trying to be restrictive. It's simply saying then there's a different process that requires different public input, different notification, et cetera, for us to go through for this to occur. So
Which is
we're just
already set up.
trying to cover that spectrum for me.
To me, it does feel like this conversation is evolving enough where I would be more comfortable continuing this item. And I also am more comfortable continuing it because even though it does have broad application and it was presented as a more broad fix in our county plan, we have had a number of members of a single community speak about the unintended consequences from their perspective just for their one part of the county. And so I would like to have some more time to look at that specifically.
Okay. And I would too. I think that it gives us the opportunity to digest a little bit more and see the ramifications of it and what it looks like, all the way through the process, both processes, either this process or it's going through the regular process and making it match, what we have and what what we're looking at. But I'm going to echo this point of having a minority piece, 1/10 of an acre. That stands out to me, and 1/10 of an acre dictates what goes on. That seems to be a little bit hard to swallow, and I think that we should do something. I mean, you can go back through and rezone, right? Go through a rezoning process with it, so it's not like that it completely dominates it. There is a process in which it could go through, and so I think that as we go down through it, let's find a balance that seems to work a little better for us. So with that, would we like to continue that for?
I'm gonna guess it's gonna take you a few weeks to kind of work on that data. What do you think, 3, 4? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we could be available your next meeting, but yeah, we could,
3 weeks?
that's plenty. That's plenty.
I make sure I get. We are on 13. I'd move that we continue regular agenda item 13 for 3 weeks.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to continue agenda item number 13 for 3 weeks. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0 to continue.
So just 2 is fine.
It's,
I think 3 weeks there is a meeting.
There is a meeting on 3 weeks. There's not a meeting in 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Number 14 is to adopt or deny an ordinance to amend the Utah County Land Use Ordinance, Chapter 3, relative to the requirements for the hunting, preserve, and shooting ranges.
Brandon Larson, Community Development Staff. We brought brought an amendment to you a few months ago relative to hunting preserves and shooting ranges. And once that was adopted by the county, we applied that for Wasatch Wing and Clay and found a couple of things we wanted to change in this to try to make it a little easier. Found our requirement relative to the road dedications was a challenge, as well as the parking requirements for event facilities. Part of their proposal, part of one of the uses they wanted to use on their property, and that was included in section 353 for hunting preserves, was event facilities. And so I'll speak to parking requirements first. Parking requirements for event facilities for hunting preserve, you have to have one space per every 30 square feet of event facility. When we applied that, it was quite a high number of parking spaces, and so we looked at that and looked at an adjacent jurisdiction to see what their parking standard was for similar use, and found that they required one parking space per 40 square feet of reception center facilities. And so we proposed to basically follow suit with Salt Lake County and have one parking space per 40 square feet of event facilities. And then also relative to
Reception?
Yeah, so for event facilities for hunting preserves, reception centers, so forth. Relative to
What would that give in parking?
what would that give them?
What would that give them, or what would that require them?
When they first came through, I think they ended up with 150 spaces. That will bump them down to 112. So it reduced it quite a bit, actually. And then as far as road dedications, we felt the requirement was a little rigid. It just outright required dedications of county road to the county, and we felt, there may be some cases maybe where the county may not want the road. And with the case of Wasatch Wing and Clay, they have miles and miles of unpaved county Class B roads, and perhaps the county doesn't want to take those on yet. So thought, and also looking from the perspective of the property owner, we felt, trying to pay for this surveying for 3 to 5 miles of road dedication seemed to be a challenge. So we proposed some flexibility to basically allow for the county commission to determine whether or not a road dedication would be required. Basically allow somebody to come to the county commission and have a discussion about whether the road dedication would be required. So.
Okay.
Those are the only
this went
changes
through
we
the planning
proposed.
commission with a 4-0.
Yes, it did go
in favor.
4-0 at the planning commission. So
Okay,
those are the only changes we proposed. So
they seem reasonable. Any comments on those?
I appreciate the changes. I think they're good clarification. I'm generally favorable, and think this is a good move in a good direction. So.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, a motion be in order.
Move that we adopt regular agenda item number 14 with the
Second.
noted changes.
I got a
Second.
motion and a second to adopt regular agenda item number 14 as stated with, is there changes in there?
Well, they're clarification.
Okay, the clarifications. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Number 15 is to ratify the commission chair's signature on the determination of notice of the catastrophic public nuisance on state and federal lands within the boundaries of Utah County. Commissioner.
So I just had a question on this one, somewhat procedurally, because I was surprised that it came out, because typically we have an email chain that we approve these through, and the last email that I had sent on this was I didn't have questions on it.
Just for clarification, this action doesn't need to be on the agenda. It doesn't need to be ratified by state law. The commission chair has authority to sign that letter and send it.
Okay.
So this item could be stricken if you'd like to do that.
But just for clarification, I think your point is well taken, though, because I think there was emails that went out, right? That I just assumed that there was emails that went out in support of it.
I think
I
Mr.
signed the
Griffin
letter
can
with the
actually address
assumption
that.
that everyone was
I
on
think there was
board.
some communication that was provided.
I don't think we ever took any formal action on that.
Yeah, formal action, I think, is not needed, actually.
And so has that letter been sent?
Yes. Yeah, the letter's been sent to all the parties indicated.
And what are we anticipating the reaction of NRCS to that letter? Because I guess I'm a little bit torn with this. I understand and I appreciate all the work that really Commissioner Lee has led on from the county side and other departments on the mitigation efforts. And I know the NRCS was very involved with that. And only when we found out that the funding may not come as needed, that we're going through with this catastrophic public notice letter. And I understand that there's a purpose in that, but I want to make sure that it's coordinated, and it's just stating that we need to do this if it's not going to be done, and it's not like trying to send a message to agencies that, from my understanding, have been working with us pretty cooperatively so far.
Yes, so NRCS has been involved in all of our meetings. They've been there all along. There's no resistance from them at all. They haven't signaled any of that. They're going through their process. They have their process, which is different than this. Plus, all of the cities or representatives have been in meetings with us. Even down at the sheriff's department in coordination and cooperation with this, and the cities were all on board as well. All the stakeholders are on board with what this letter is, and then of course we had to coordinate with the state as well, the Attorney General's office, and had that meeting with them. So all the stakeholders have been involved, all the way through the process, and they're all on board, favorable with it. It doesn't throw anything off with NRCS. I don't even know, have they received their federal funding or not, Richard? Okay, so they have not received their federal funding. It does cause some problems for us with. In essence, they can't do anything. They just sit there. They're just sitting there, they're waiting. And so I think, for us, to put this notification out there like that, it gives us an opportunity to actually do some things and to get up there and at least look at the process and ask the landowners, which is the federal government, the state, and maybe some others, what the plan is and what the plan can do. It's not necessarily an action in which we're saying we're going up there and doing that. Matter of fact, within the letters that we got back from the AG's office, they put out there multiple times, anything lawful. You can do anything that's lawful. So it's not a step on somebody's toes, but it's driving the conversation in a place where we're saying we have the public at risk here. We recognize that infrastructure and lives are in jeopardy. And we're not just sitting back and saying, well, let's just see what happens. And this is a determination for us that gives us at least some opportunities and advantages. In court, I don't know, you've been neck deep into this. Do you have anything that you'd like to say on it?
Not really, unless you have some questions. I think you stated the position fairly concisely. This
Well,
doesn't-
and Commissioner Lee, I find everything that you just said to be appropriate, and I am supportive of that. And again, I appreciate what's been done so far. And so the way that you just said that was a little bit, and I understand because it's an official notice, a little bit different than the way the letter reads. And so that's all I was trying to verify. Is I know that this issue has been a contentious one. It's one that perhaps the courts haven't decided on, and it could even be a litigious posture, potentially if we're trying to claim the right to go onto the lands. And so we have to do something to protect our residents. And so the way you articulated is great. I just wanted to make sure from a legal perspective, this letter wasn't doing something other than that.
Yeah.
Maybe Court, you can speak to that.
Yeah, the statute was enacted in 2015 and has been amended to provide the county with some indemnifications in the event that there were litigation over county actions. And so we'd like to be able to we'd like to be able to have that option to move forward with lawful actions, and yet a little bit of indemnification from the state. That was enacted just this year. And in order to have those indemnifications or protections, the notice has to be issued and the statute complied with, and the 30 days runs. So that's one of the big considerations in moving forward with this.
Okay.
I mean, we had that avalanche the other day, which we saw we thought it was a mudslide. They thought it was a mudslide. They reported it as a mudslide. It turned out to be an avalanche. So the good thing about an avalanche is that it'll eventually melt, right? We don't have to clean it up with. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a mudslide. When you see it, it's brown, so it looks like dirt. But there's a lot going on there, and we recognize that there's more to come. And with sending out a determination like this, it's my intent, and I'll publicly state it, that we have a lot of watershed protection areas in our county that I think we need to aggressively protect, that are on federal lands. And we need to find out what their plan is. We just can't say, well, we're just gonna hope and pray that they're gonna have some protection, which they're not, and the federal government's failing when it comes to some of those land, policies. And so we bear the consequences for generations to come, potentially, when fires go ripping through there, and now we've got compromised watershed areas, which is gonna affect us. And so this, I mean, I know it looks like a shot over the bow, but what it is we're just saying, hey, what is your plan? What is your plan? Show us your plan for how what's going on up here in these mountains, because we've got to do something to, we're hopefully that you'll be a partner with us, and we can work together in solving a problem that we see as potentially happening all along the Wasatch Front and all over in the state.
Dave, I am fine with striking this item. I heard the comment that this does not need to be ratified. My reading of the law is that it's the chief executive officer of the county. Do we interpret that to be the chair, or do we interpret that to be the entire commission?
Commissioner Rain, this is Court Griffin. The statute defines in this case that the chair is the chief executive officer. So it's defined by statute, and ratification is not absolutely necessary, and a failure to ratify would not affect the legality or purpose of the notice.
You know, I know it states that in the statute. I actually would disagree with that. I think that it should be all three. I think that we're trying to make sure that we're all on board. We want everybody on board with it going forward. I assumed everyone was knowing that we were proceeding, so, although it says that in the statute that can happen, it seems to me like all three of us, or at least when it's coming from the county, it should be a majority of the quorum, personally.
You could do that, legally not required, but that's, clearly nothing would prohibit that. That would be fine to do if you like to.
Is a good practice.
Well, maybe we could strike this, but I would like to know if the other county commissioners are in favor of that determination. That letter that we sent out, the notice.
As far as acting, yes, I'm not objected to making sure that we take the steps to protect our citizens. You know, like has been emphasized, I think it needs to be a collaborative effort. We need to work. We've got some great congressmen, some great senators. You know, we need to make sure our efforts are all coordinated with them. And I guess that was where this one just kind of caught me off guard. I was like, oh, I thought we were gonna try and make sure all that was in place before that happened. And so that was the only reason I held that up for conversation from my end, was just going, oh, kind of surprised me.
Sure.
Because when I had said, oh, I don't have any questions at this time, in my email back to court, it was just kind of as a, you know, I thought we were gonna have a little more coordination there, particularly, you know, I know we've met with Senator Lee's office, Senator Romney, Congressman McAdams. You know, here's one chance that having a Democrat might actually benefit us, because we've got a chance to have some people from both sides pushing to get that appropriations through for us. And so I think that it's critical that we, you know, utilize all of those various resources to make sure that happens. And, you know, I don't think this is restrictive in that necessarily, because I think it's a procedural step, but that was my concern. That was just making sure all of that happened, you know.
Yeah. As far as
And Commissioner Lee, this may just be one of those things where, you know, I think all of our cadence sometimes, when we have something that you take a formal action, it kind of spurs some additional due diligence. And I know that you've been working on this since before I even came to office. It's right after the fires, and so was Commissioner Ivey. And so, but when it came on our official agenda, my biggest question here is the one that you addressed about the shot over the bow. And that's what I just would have thought, if this is going out, I would want to make sure that we're coordinated with those receiving the letter so that they receive it in the spirit that we're intending to send it.
Yeah. And realize from my perspective, or any of our perspectives, coordinating official action is not in our preview. I can't do that. That would be probably against the law.
Right.
And so I just assume that happens with emails that I see that are out there, and when I see a ratification, or when I'm asked to sign a document, I go with the assumption that groundwork had already been taking place.
Fair, absolutely fair.
Sure.
Okay, I'll move that we strike regular agenda item 15.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to strike agenda item number 15. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Okay, number 17 is to approve and authorize the signature of a lease agreement between Utah County and Leaser and Thanksgiving Point Institution. Institute as a leasee related to the butterfly biosphere.
Yeah, I could address any questions on that. This is simply one of the parts of the transaction that was approved. It's been more than a year ago now. But with regard to the funding, the county purchased a piece of property out there, the outdoor biosphere portion. And this is the lease which provides back to Thanksgiving Point the right to use that property. in consideration for the right of the various school districts to have free access to the biosphere.
Right. During that whole process, I voted in the negative. And so when I saw this up again, I'm just gonna signal that I will be voting in the negative, but I'd like to express why. And that is that I find it hard that although legally, and I wanna make sure and say that, legally, Utah County can give $2 million to an organization like this. The process of skirting around, I don't want to say law, but skirting around and making it so that it is legal, in the sense that we in essence are buying property so that we can give $2 million. That always hits me wrong. And so that's part of the reason why I voted no on there. Now, I've been to this butterfly biosphere. They went out there and invited us to come out here. It's a beautiful facility. That's not the question. Will it do well in the way of drawing people here? That's to be determined as it goes on in the future. My anxiety with this whole process is that the county and taxpayer dollars are being spent on purchasing a piece of property so we can get around certain little rules so that we can then turn around and give them $2 million and then lease it back to them. And that to me is, I will vote no on that.
As kind of historical for me, this is one that I inherited when I came into office, and I felt like the county had made a commitment to these people, and that's why I voted for it, was because I felt the county had made a commitment, signed a contract, and it wasn't my job to undo that commitment.
Yes, just for clarification, this lease is required pursuant to an existing agreement that we have with Thanksgiving Point.
Okay, with that, a motion is in order.
I'll move that we approve regular agenda item number 17.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve agenda item number 17. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye or nay. So that's a 2-1 with Commissioner Ainge and Commissioner Ivy voting aye and Commissioner Lee voting nay. That passes 2-1. That seems like we're at the end of our agenda. We need items 20, 22, and 23. And we can strike number 21.
Motion to strike regular agenda item number
Oh,
21.
wait, you need 21? Okay, I was probably confused on your email. We need 20.
Okay.
We need them all.
All right, I will move that we approve and set a date, time, and location for closed meetings in our strategy session for today's date at this location following completion of the regular agenda for regular agenda items number 20, 21, 22, and 23.
Second.
I got a motion and a second to approve and set date, times, and locations as stated for 20, 21, 22, and 23. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. We will now move into our closed meetings.
Any public comment?
Oh, yes. Let's see. We have no work session. Is there any public comment? General public comment? Seeing none, we'll move into our closed meetings. And Mayor, you guys will be up first.